On tonight's program, we spend some time on the ins and outs of combat.
Instead of giving me a kill the enemies objective, it gives me a scan the thing objective, and then puts enemies around the objective in such a way that I might be able to pull this off without triggering them, and that's really fun.
Dyson Sphere. How will it interact with the Foundry?
I could also see it that there are certain spots around the Dyson Sphere which are Foundry doors.
And how many Easter eggs can you find in our missions? Join us on the Foundry Roundtable. Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogan1701. Some say they're the real reason behind this week's stock market downturn, and that they were also twerking in latex this weekend with far worse results. All we know is they're the Knights of the Foundry Roundtable, Hippiejohn, Markhawkman, and Greendragoon.
I don't know if I like your show.
I don't accept everything that he just said, but how's it going, everybody?
And we have with us a bit of a non-traditional guest this weekend. I wanted to bring Stoutes on the show, but he was unavailable to join us over Skype. So earlier this week, he emailed me some input on our discussion topics, which I'll read throughout the show, and then he gave us a topic to discuss. Stoutes is a fairly new author who hails from Holland. He also goes by Lib in game, and we actually reviewed his first mission, Collectiveness Strikes Gold, on a previous episode.
I've got it on my list within the next couple of weeks, too.
It's one that we definitely enjoyed.
Plus, he's also the guy who's been doing those cool in-depth reviews.
Yeah.
So we'll hear more from him and what he sent me later on as we get into other topics. But first, we must do the news, and there really isn't much. We've had some back-end maintenance to the Foundry on Tuesday, which resulted in a couple of minutes worth of downtime. For one brief shining moment, some of us thought maybe it was some fixes, but Brandflakes was adamant it was just routine back-end stuff, and nothing was changing for us.
So, given that a lot of fixes have shown up unannounced, or in patch notes or anything, do you actually know that nothing changed?
Not for sure, unless any of you guys working in the Foundry today.
I'm in there right now. I'm not seeing anything different.
I tinkered with it a little bit while I was creating some images of costumes earlier today. I did notice that there's a whole lot of stuff in there that I don't remember seeing before, but some of these are not new, and I'm not sure exactly if any of them are things that weren't there last week, so.
What sort of things?
Well, I was going through the list of character costumes, and I noticed that the one that that it's not labeled Sela, it's like Romulan Ensign number 4 or something like that.
Yeah, she's been in there for months and months.
But it's been updated to the new appearance, Sela.
So it's still Sela, but now it's new Sela.
So it still has the blonde hair, but now it has the giant Calciar logo in the center of the chest, the crimson red bracers, and the giant red cape.
Okay, I'm gonna do a little mini rant here. I'm just gonna implore Cryptic to, guys, whenever you make changes to the Foundry, please put it in the patch notes.
I know, you guys
we got a whole giant Romulan update and none of it was in the patch notes.
We've gotten bugs fixed and you guys have not taken credit for it. Why are you missing out?
Okay, I'm not even going to say taking credit for it, but I think as the people who work in the Foundry and having players who play the Foundry, I think it's a disservice to the community of players and authors to not let us know when things change. I think it's a huge disservice.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm almost going to guess that it's a disconnect in communication between the core Foundry team and the Stowe team. And it'd be really nice if you guys could kind of work that out.
Whoever compiles the patch notes doesn't get all of the information.
There's definitely something going on. Anyway,
the other news, of course, is that Frost is back.
Yay!
From vacation. Yay.
I totally guessed it right about him going to Gen Con. I'm almost a little surprised he admitted it.
Do we have any pictures of that?
He said so on the forums.
Shame we missed you missed the opportunity to get some sort of candid shot that we can use for blackmail later on, right?
Literally in the same building as Cryptic Frost. And technically Christine Thompson.
Yeah, who we interviewed not too long ago. Some of our favorite devs. So a couple of things caught my eye that he had posted since he's been back. There's, a few little, bug reports he's saying, either, well, I'll file a report on this or, this is a known issue. One of the ones was about the Ice Caves map, which, of course got, cut in half, in the Legacy of Romulus update, causing a bunch of missions to have, a bunch of errors because things are now outside the playable area. So he says on the Ice Caves map, there has been work on getting it fixed, but it's proven more stubborn than expected. The basic situation is the core map has been fixed, but those fixes are not propagating into the Foundry for an unknown reason. So he says they'll see if they can get some more attention on this. Can't promise anything. So obviously that one's being worked on, but it's proving difficult.
So I want to put out there, for anyone who, that's the kind of communication that we want. That's very clear and very honest. Nothing changed. It's not fixed, but it's very clear communication, Cryptic. Cryptic Frost does it right. The rest of you should pay attention.
I would agree.
Send him donuts or something.
Just promote him to, I don't know, Brandon's go-to guy for communication or something like that.
No, I don't
want to say replace Brandon because we like Brandon, but
yeah, there's just something about the way that Frost tells us what's going on that it's clear, it's honest, and it tells us actually kind of what's going on.
and there's more of that as well.
If you call it that.
Yeah.
What Brandon has is that Brandon tells us what he knows, which a lot of the time because he only knows what the people who are actually working with stuff know. Frost, on the other hand, actually has the ability to talk to the people in person.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon isn't even in the same building. I mean, he's got drive for an hour to get down to Cryptic Office?
Something like that.
I have no idea.
The other thing that caught my eye was on the Argelius map, which of course a couple of you guys have used to build in the black space around the map. It's an interior. And the black space borders were changed in that last update. He says on the Argelius map where the black space on the map was reduced and thus causing problems for anyone who is using the empty space. I honestly do not expect this will be changed. While it's possible for one to construct a map in the black space of a pre-made map, it is not how those maps were designed to be used. I understand this sucks for those of you who put in a lot of time and work on such a map. I have put in a request for it to be added back in, but I don't know if it will be added. If or when.
Yeah, I mean, I like this. I mean, he's definitely being very honest about it. I mean, he's still forwarding along our request, but he's saying, look, I mean, what basically happened is it basically reverted back to its original size. I mean, we didn't used to have all these maps with black space.
Mm-hmm.
Not this much of it, yeah.
No, I mean...
one thing I noticed a few days ago when I was tinkering was that the Bayshore Fire Caves map now has a giant amount of black space.
Oh, a bunch of them, gained a bunch of black space. I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened.
It's one of those things that now we know because now somebody said it, that they never intended for us to work in the black space like that.
I'm sure
they didn't expect it, and so when they're making changes to things, they're not anticipating missions where people have built out there because they never anticipated it. They never thought of it. They're not going to support it is what we're getting, but that's honest. Come on, at least we know.
Of course, the flip side of that is why did it need to be messed with once it was now big size?
It probably had something to do with the fact that they went in there to fix the pathing.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that one, that's possible.
I mean, they may have reverted to some copy.
Yep.
So, there was a little bit of silver lining out of this, and that was that, Cryptic Frost, said that he would pass along the feedback that we would like a empty black interior map to do our custom creations in. And of course it goes with the usual no promises, but still, I mean, at the very least, he's passing along the, info, which is really all he can do.
Yeah. It's good, and it's good feedback too.
So that said, I mean, I want to pass along the message, and I posted this in the thread on the forums, is authors who were using the Argalius interior map, there's another map which also has a lot of black space, that basically, has a really deep, bottom and makes it a perfect target for getting maps copied into it, because when you copy a bunch of objects, whatever happens to be the master selected object, ends up at 0, which means that if you have a taller construction, it's very possible that your construction will shift down, and if you have a shallow floor, it'll basically compress everything. That said, this map, and I'm stalling while I actually look it up, has a really deep floor, which makes it's got a ton of vertical space and makes it. The map I was looking for is KV2 Interior 02. And like I said, I mean, take a look. I mean, this is a perfect ideal. I mean, even if you can't select your assets in the Argalius, you can still select them in the list. So just go through, select all your objects. Do remember that there is a bug with default dialog, so that any objects that have default dialog, and you'll need to copy those separately. But other than that, I mean, I literally moved an entire, 475 object map with 1,000 vertical difference from the Argalius interior over to this cave V2 interior, and it worked perfectly. I mean,
cool.
So yeah, I mean, it's not as horrific as it sounds.
Yeah. The one that I've been using is called the Rapier interior, because it's a Starfleet interior. It has a bridge at one end, and then a huge bunch of black space in the middle, and the rest of the interior at the other end.
Yeah, there's one that's not likely to get compressed.
Well, we hope.
Unless they rearrange the map.
There's no predicting that.
Another one is the NGC 4447 interior.
All right, moving on to what we've been working on. Hippie, why don't you start us off?
Same thing I've been working on, although I'm still working on cartoons and using the Foundry to make brightly colored things that make me happy and make me smile. Right now,
those TOS assets.
I do. I'm loving the TOS assets right now. Right now I'm working on a haunted space station, but also there's another idea of possibly making a cartoon for the current Foundry challenge, but I don't have a really great idea there yet, so I'm not committing to that. Instead, I'm going to work on what I do feel like I have a pretty fun idea for, which is a haunted space station. It's a lot of fun to be playing with right now, and that's what I've been working on in the Foundry, is making brightly colored, fun, cartoon-looking things.
Nice.
John goes to his happy place.
Yep.
Mark, what have you been working on?
Well, I recently started doing the initial setup for a mission called Adwaita Incursion, but I haven't actually gotten very far in it because I've had a lot of other things competing for my time, so I've got a few basic things done with that one, but not a whole lot.
I've seen some of your costumes. You were showing those off.
Yeah.
They were pretty interesting looking.
Well, that's really just 5 different versions of one costume.
Cool. Greendragoon, what have you been working on?
Same thing I work on every week. Try and make progress on part 2. No, I've actually made some pretty good progress. I made a bunch of progress on my shuttle interior. I'm almost through it. If I can just work out this last little bit of dialogue, which is actually a part that I've been kind of avoiding because of all the dialogue. I worked a little bit more on my black hole, and it's still not working for me. Unfortunately, the nebula, even the single nebulas, are just so thick that it makes making the whole part really hard.
Well,
so
if you figure out how, let us know.
Yeah, I'm thinking more and more that I might have to rethink what kind of astronomical phenomena. There's a good question for the community: is what kind of astronomical phenomena could I put at the end of my mission? The only thing is it has to be able to hide a ship, or a ship has to be able to hide in it, and I want to, if possible, not just make it another nebula.
Well, when I did Darkness Between the Stars, I had a lot of the, actually most of the mission takes place in a dark matter nebula. It's not a normal nebula, but it's kind of sort of along the same line.
Well, let's call that our community question, and we'll see what people come up with.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Still your colliding neutron star, but that would be cheating.
I still haven't found a good one for that yet.
Oh. Well, if you don't.
I had been working on it a little bit, but I haven't found a way to do it exactly the way I want yet.
Did you try using a Class X planet?
Which one?
Class X.
Class X.
It's what I use for the dark matter planet.
Oh, is that one that's really dark with just a little bit of lava?
Yeah, it looks like it has red cracks with lava oozing out of them, but almost all of the surface is almost completely black.
I'll take a look at that one, because I had been using gas giants and was trying to make them so they don't look like gas giants anymore.
Yeah. Well, it used to be that when the space lighting was working, that you can position the lighting just right, and the bloom would hit the gas cells.
Yeah.
Light up.
But obviously that doesn't work anymore.
Another bug I really wish were fixed.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I've been working on. I should say that I'm working on about 3 different projects at the moment, so that's why I appear to jump back and forth between different maps. One thing I've been working on is my crashed, half-flooded space station map, which I actually showed to Greendragoon the other day.
Oh yes, and I was very impressed.
It's turned out pretty cool, I think.
It kind of, I don't know if anybody listening has ever played Sea of Heroes, but in some of the later missions, they had this set that they would use that was basically a office building, but the lower level was flooded. So it was like dank and moldy, and in some reason your station just really reminded me of that, which is actually really great, because I mean the thing is like half sitting in water. But we also kind of found out something else cool while we were doing that.
Remind me what that was.
The chairs that you can actually sit in.
Oh, right. One of the assets in the TOS ones that were added not too long ago is a table with 4 chairs around it, and you can click to sit in those chairs. You mouse over it and you get the little chair icon, you right click and you sit.
Yeah,
in the Foundry. That's the only sittable asset I know of that's in the Foundry.
Yeah, my guess is that Zero pulled those out of the the Constitution ship interior, and everything attached to those objects came with it.
Yep, even the little code that allows for sitting. So that's pretty cool. The other main thing I've been working on is a map that's, it's essentially a concentration camp. So I built out a grid with sort of streets, and, out of the fortification elements, they're just sort of low walls, and putting up guard posts and sort of a tent city, and then some of the big colony buildings around one of the edges. You're going to have to attempt a rescue of a prisoner that's being held there, and I'm trying to figure out how I can make it so it's like a, what's the game I'm thinking of? Splinter Cell, where it's very stealth based. I don't know if I'll be exactly able to do that. Maybe that timid creature, how that works these days, could help, where it doesn't attack unless you attack it. The other thought I had was, make it so you choose at the beginning of the map whether you want to go in with guns blazing or try and sneak in. If you choose the one path, all the mobs are hostile. If you choose the other, the mobs are hostile but with timid creatures, so they don't shoot at you unless you start shooting. That could be a possibility. I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's cool.
I think the idea of using neutral mobs is probably the best. I'm sitting here thinking about everything that you're saying, and I'm like, I like the idea of a neutral mob that isn't going to attack unless you attack. That would work.
I'm finally finding a use for that.
Yeah. I mean, I had some NPCs you go in and do attack, and they're kind of in a stunned state. They're not so expecting an attack, so they don't fire until you do. The only downside to that is that it almost kind of makes it easy, because you can only aggro one group at a time unless you're just intentionally firing at other groups.
But I assume you can get them by aggro if you throw a grenade or something, right?
Yeah, if you did a grenade. I mean, Foundry test characters aren't great for testing that sort of thing.
No, this is true. Okay, and let's see. Stoutes says he is working on Collectiveness Strikes Gold 2, a sequel to his original. And this is a mission that introduces most of the main characters. Or no, the original one introduced most of the main characters. So the new one is introducing a new enemy and prepares the story to be intertwined with the other mission he's working on, which is The Master's Slave 2, which is a prequel on the KDF side. So it's going to answer a bunch of questions from the other two, and but this time will be from a KDF point of view. I kind of like that, intertwining a series so that it spans the factions.
I do too, because it forces people to make KDF characters.
I figured you would like that, being our resident Klingon.
I always thought it'd be interesting to do a Foundry mission that started in Stowe, but ended in Neverwinter. You'd actually have to go through 2 different games in order to find out what happens.
I always thought that was cool. That would be cool, back in the days when I was playing, the Star Wars flight sims like TIE Fighter, and then the ground-based ones like Dark Forces, where if you made a mod where, progressing through the storyline, you had to switch between the games so you get space and ground. It used to be there weren't many games that had space and ground.
True.
Now Stowe is kind of one of the few.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't count what Tor has as much in the way of space.
No, it's an on-rails shooter, is what it is. Which it's fun for, 10 minutes or so, every so often. Alright, let's move on to mission reviews. Greendragoon, what do you got?
So, I was going to play one of Mark's missions, because I realized I hadn't played any of his, but these other guys talked me out of it. So, Mark, you can blame them for the fact that I didn't play one of your missions.
I like how he's blaming us.
I just suggested, here's another great author you could do as well.
I just said,
I said, hey, I'm going to play one of Mark's missions. He said, no, play this one.
I didn't say no.
Oh. Alright, I'm just turning my microphone.
So anyway, I will still get to Mark's missions, but I ended up playing A Will and a Barclay by, was it XR 77?
377.
377.
That's good.
It is actually really good. It's very much a character piece. I mean, the initial premise is basically based around a bug that was installed years ago, where you would go onto your bridge in your ship interior, and all of the positions would be manned by the same officer.
Well, it was 2 or 3 officers repeated to fill all of the bridge stations.
Yeah, it basically the check that made sure that no officer was used twice broke. And this was up for a while. It's one of those things that I think this happened before free to play. I mean, so Hippiejohn, I don't even know if you ever even saw this one. But it was one of those bugs that was happening around the early times of the Foundry. And so this mission is actually based around that. And the author kind of takes the effort to kind of fill you in on what the bug was in the mission description. But basically, more or less, the mission kind of blames that bug on a certain character named Amanda Barclay, who is the daughter of Reginald Barclay. And I found it kind of interesting because he actually went to giving quite a lot of backstory on what happens to Barclay after his last appearance in Voyager. Apparently, he ended up with that one girl from the Equinox, and I'm spacing on her name. But I think she was the one who was basically claustrophobic. Anyway, I mean, so you meet up with this, you're kind of asked to kind of help assist in the tracking down of this issue and what happened. And you meet up with Amanda Barclay at Starfleet Academy, and she's working on the holodeck. And pretty quickly you find out that she has a tendency for things getting out of hand. And I mean, it's very much a character piece kind of centered around this character. And you basically trying to track down this program that apparently got loose and what went wrong with it. And you find out that a portion of the code is based on the Iconian virus from TNG. Basically, it keeps trying to extrapolate itself and ends up you end up kind of running in through this whirlwind of a holographic simulation, trying to stay one step ahead of this virus and eventually shut it down. It's very clever. The dialogue and characterization is top-notch. I easily gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it.
Sounds good. Amanda Barclay was one of those that we suggested ought to become like a duty officer or something. Yeah,
I think she should become a photonic.
One of those great Foundry characters.
If they put me in charge of rewards for Foundry missions, I would give all qualifying, whatever they came up with, Foundry missions, the dilithium reward that they currently do. And rather than doubling the dilithium reward for a spotlight mission, what I would do is I would make the spotlight missions worth something different. The one that I believe he has spotlighted is called One Too Many, which is the sequel to the one you just played, Dragoon. And I think at the end of that, if you played the spotlight mission, you should maybe get, an Amanda Barclay Doff or something. And that to me just feels like that would be the kind of rewards I'd love to see in the Foundry.
Yeah, I would definitely love to see. Wish we could do something like that. I don't know how, it could be done without taking up heavy amounts of dev time or.
Well, let's take up their time.
There you go.
Let's their time fixing bugs. And giving us features.
It'd be different guys, though, right?
It would technically be the same guys who give us assets, too.
Mm.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Well, it'd be really cool if they ever got Dwight Schultz on to reprise Barclay, if they worked in Amanda Barclay and as even as a appearance. I don't know, something to think about, Cryptic.
Something to think about.
Because getting Dwight Schultz on would actually be really awesome.
She's one of the best characters ever created. Amanda Barclay is one of the best characters ever created in the Foundry, hands down.
Yeah, it's definitely just a lot of fun just to even just kind of see her stymied or surprised when things don't go the way she expects, which happens. So, definitely a great character mission.
Right, the one that I played for review this week from my new mission queue is Traitor's Tales by nrrobiec. This one has you going to find a traitor, somebody who had defected from the Federation. This is, you find out later on that or at least he looks like a Zindi, primate. So he had defected from the Federation, now he wants to defect back. Says he has information about, a huge threat that threatens everybody. So you're tasked to go and find him. When you drop out of warp, you find a big destroyed fleet, and you board a Cation carrier, which actually a Pharosan carrier. You used the Cation carrier for that, to find out what happened. There's a bunch of Phorasans on board that you have to fight. And you don't, to my mind, I didn't really get answers onto what had destroyed that fleet. Hopefully it's not in there and I missed it. Because, that does happen. Sometimes you're reading along fast, and you miss the explanation that you should have gotten. And then you go down, you find out that this traitor ship has been shot down by the Klingons. The Klingon captain you run into basically says, you can go ahead and look at the wreckage if you want, since he says he has this big threat, but I don't expect you'll find anything. I thought that was kind of an interesting characterization of a Klingon, where he doesn't just attack you for being Federation. He actually lets you go there, do what you said what you came there to do, because of the possible implications. It's just like a smart Klingon, and I think all Klingons, we should see more smart Klingons in missions. People tend to write them as just sort of, dumb brutes, but they're not.
No, definitely not. And I would almost say it's one of the keys to good KDF storytelling.
Yes. Is,
I would agree.
They couldn't be out in space if they weren't smart. They're not Packlids.
But they might
even the Packlids are smarter than they let on.
Yeah.
One thing that was a little strange in this mission was when you go to the interior of the Pharosan ship, and he actually does point out, or, have it in there in dialogue when you meet one of the survivors on this ship, that, you say, why are you using Cation ship? He says, it's not actually, it's a Pharosan ship. We just use the same design. It's just, you gotta look at the markings. I thought that was kind of clever. It's a little strange because the map that he uses for the Pharosan ship was a Klingon interior. I'm not sure which one it was, but one of the Klingon ship interiors. And that just sort of struck me as, kind of took me out. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not on a Klingon ship. I'm not sure what Cation ships are supposed to look like. Is there a bridge with the Atrox carrier?
No.
So we don't really know what the interiors are supposed to look like.
Well,
right.
I was going to say, what was it? Chico Chavez's mission that we did a review way back when had the Cation interior, and he basically used the that Klingon listening post that kind of just used the generic interior back in the early Fed. But it worked kind of well for him because it had the upper platform and then the bay below with all the consoles.
Well, for this one, it just didn't strike me as right for it. And maybe there'd be a better interior map somewhere out there to use. From there, he also used as the bridge of the ship the Bortas Bridge, which I absolutely love. I think that's a great bridge and a great map. I had one thing that happened on that one, which I've reported in the bug forum, is I had one of those Jello floor incidents where, okay, so I had it on Elite. So I was fighting a captain level mob, which he has you fight on this map. I died and respawned. There was one guy in that mob, there was maybe about 3 of them left alive. One guy ran back to the foot of the stairs that lead up to the main platform on the bridge. The other 2 sunk through the floor and were still firing at my guys. I could fire at them and they could fire at me even though they were down at the very bottom of the map. Obviously that's not nrrobiec's fault, and I didn't make a report about that. So something to watch out for if you want to use the Bortascu Bridge. The other thing I was going to mention to him was enemy placement. It's something that's very difficult to get to look natural, is your enemy placement. I mean, a lot of us sort of leave them in that clump that they come in and stick them somewhere. And it doesn't look very natural. So I mean, there was one that he just had in a corner in the interior of the ship. And it's like, what are they doing there? Are they just sitting there waiting for somebody? Or, so I would advise break them up a little bit, maybe have them, you can assign animations to combat mobs. So maybe have them working on consoles or something. Scanning with tricorders. Who knows?
Yeah.
There's a whole slew of things you can have them do.
Absolutely.
You can wait a bunch of actions. Certain consoles, if you put them nearby, and unfortunately it's really hard to find those consoles now, but a little trial and error, you might be able to figure it out. Certain consoles, if you put them nearby, they'll actually interact with them. And in fact, there's one of the waits is for a job animation, which they'll make an effort to actually go to a console that has the hookups for interaction, and will attempt to interact with it.
Okay, so after the ship, you go down to the crash site. The crash site was definitely my favorite map of the mission, because he littered it with debris. Lots of things were on fire. My one complaint is there were a lot of consoles scattered around, and I thought, obviously we don't have a lot of options when it comes to debris. So a lot of intact consoles looking around sort of looked weird, but, I understand how limited we are. But it was definitely a good map and a good use of that sort of purple volcano map that we have, the purple volcano kind of stuff. So it was good at that, and he was trying to make some single combat mobs, and there was one of them where I think he must have put them under the floor or something, the ones he didn't want to spawn, because they started coming up out of the floor at me. So I'm not sure if that's really working as he wants it to work. It may not work at all. But there were several fights where he had done that did work. So it's kind of random sometimes when these tricks and things will work or when they won't work. But overall, I really liked the mission. It ended very quickly. It was not a long mission. I think there's a lot of room to stretch it out. You don't get to the end of the plot. You don't find out what this big threat, this Traitor has to tell you. You don't find out that information. I think it suffers from what a lot of missions suffer from, which is not enough to do on each map to justify being on that map. And you really need to give the player something to run around and do, so that it's not just loading screen, loading screen, loading screen, loading screen, loading screen. And that would be my advice is, sort of flesh it out. Flesh each map out so that you spend, 10, 20 minutes on each map. And, but otherwise, a very good map and hope to see more from nrrobiec, maybe a sequel or something, because, there's questions that need answering here.
Well, there's the best thing that you can say about any mission. I want to see more.
Yes, I want to see more.
So, getting back to what we talked about, earlier, or last week, with the sequels, and do you think this part 1 gave away enough, in its first part, or could it stand to at least answer a few questions?
I felt like it was a fairly good amount. But I felt like with how little there was in the mission, it felt like maybe half a mission instead of a whole mission. I felt like he could add a lot more onto the end and it wouldn't feel like too much. He could complete the story in one mission. So, I mean, as far as giving away information, no, I think it was a pretty good balance of that. And balance is what you're looking for when you're doing a multi-parter, which he seems to be wanting to do. All right, the other one I wanted to talk about very briefly is I actually went Sunday night and played a Neverwinter mission. This is the first Neverwinter mission I've played, and I really haven't done much Neverwinter playing at all because I don't know, it just didn't strike my fancy. But I tried it, and actually I've been quite enjoying my Trickster Rogue. She's only level 6, but that's okay. She's still kind of fun to play. The mission I played is called Answer the Raven's Call by Trishani. I think it was a featured quest last week. I really enjoyed the mission. Unfortunately, I was not able to complete it because, as it turns out, I really picked a bad time to start playing Neverwinter Foundry missions because they actually broke the Foundry with their Fury of the Feywind update that went live last week. There were a couple of specific things that broke in this mission, and I should say they did have to take editing down for a while, something like 4 or 5 days. And it's now back up. Hopefully everybody can go in and fix their missions. But one of the bugs that I ran into, and I did not know this when I was playing, I actually found this out this afternoon, is that one of the exterior maps had a whole bunch of trees added to it for no reason at all. And when I was playing this mission, you load into this forest. The mission is all about werewolves. You load into this dark forest, and it's just incredibly tangled. There's trees everywhere, and I was sort of going back and forth between, I really like the atmosphere created by this dark and tangled forest, but it might be a little too much. And come to find out, it wasn't the intention of the author to make it that bad. So, forgiven for that. And then I got to the end of the mission, or, I'm pretty sure it's very close to the end, and you have to go through one of those teleporters that Neverwinter has, only the entrance to it is blocked by trees, which I don't think are supposed to be there. So, it's a nice way to see how the other half lives. Obviously, they suffer from problems just like we do. But it was a very good mission, I thought. It was fun. You went on a sort of a dream quest. Made me kind of think of Chakotay and his vision quest things. Did some very interesting custom designing there was these sort of floating islands when you're in the dream. And then there was one time when I fell through a floor. I'm pretty sure that's not the author's fault. But I don't know. I think I might stick with it as far as playing. I don't think I'm going to devote a lot of time to it, but I've been having fun with it. So I might go back. Probably won't start any Foundry missions over there because I have so many to do on the Stowe side. Okay, that's it for me. Stoutes says that he's been playing a bunch of missions lately, and we can find those all in his detailed review thread.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
He does do really good reviews too.
They've been.
I like reading them.
Very detailed, from a technical standpoint.
Well, that's what I was saying yesterday. It's something that is very useful for an author to see, someone's gut reactions when they go through things, and his very specific about suggestions for improvements. Typos. You do not know how hard it is for an author to go through and find their own typos. It's 3 times as hard as finding other people's typos.
Absolutely true. All right, moving on. Why don't we start with our tech topic? Greendragoon.
Well, this is kind of a sad week because when I originally started doing these, I came up with a list of a bunch of tech topics, and as we've been going along, I've been kind of adding to it as I see things on the forums that would make good tech topics. But unfortunately, this week marks the end of that original list. So unless people write in and make some suggestions, this may well be the end of the technical series, and then go back to normal discussion topics. But we'll kind of see what response we get from that. We're ending off this week with battle strategies, and the subject is basically the concepts and basically how to build good fights. And it seems like this is actually a really apt suggestion because this week, I think it was This Is Science started a thread basically asking what is combat good for, and it kind of just dovetailed into how to use combat effectively in your missions. So I'm going to start off with something that isn't quite as technical, but kind of related to game design, and that is how best to weave your combat into the story. I mean, how do you make the combat aspect of your mission line up with the story aspect of your mission so it doesn't feel awkward or disjointed and things feel balanced?
Well, I'll say that one of the things that I've been doing lately is making combat pretty much completely optional in my missions. I don't like to use a lot of kill objectives. Use them very sparingly. And, I'll put mobs down where I think they need to go, and then leave it up to the player whether they want to actually engage them or not. And I don't know, I have not gotten necessarily any feedback that people hate that or people like it or anything, but I personally like it.
Well,
That's my new approach.
Sorry.
Yeah, I've really added the ability to the Foundry to have optional combat. I've found that it really works better that way simply because of the fact that it's more restrictive to storytelling if you need to kill every single enemy because you have to write a story objective that requires you to shoot all of these guys.
I mean, this dovetails perfectly or goes right into my second point, which is when is it better to use option or make dialogue or combat option, and when is it better to make it mandatory?
I think always make, at least currently for me, every mission that I enjoy, including cryptic ones, the combat is optional. My objective point is go do this thing, or maybe like find these 5 objectives, or whatever it is. And I've run into this in both, like I said, Foundry and in official content. And instead of giving me a kill the enemy's objective, it gives me a scan the thing objective, and then puts enemies around the objective in such a way that I might be able to pull this off without triggering them, and that's really fun, actually.
I will also say, though, that there are times when combat should be mandatory, especially when, for instance, the combat is a definitive point in the story. For instance, you're facing off against a boss, or you're Klingons have invaded your ship and you need to take care of them. Obviously, there are cases where combat kind of needs to be mandatory because it's basically woven into part of the story.
It's what what I've heard from a lot of directors, Hollywood directors, things like that, is the action has to serve the story.
Yeah, and that's even more true. I think that's even more true in Foundry missions or in game design in general, really. Something I was kind of trying to harp on in this thread was that, at least for me, a Foundry mission is basically made up of 3 different tentpoles. One is the story, one is the environment, the visuals, the feel of the scenes, and the third is gameplay, which includes things like combat and puzzles and basically player interaction. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like for a mission to really shine, really get up there, it needs to really stand on all 3 of those. And all 3 of those need to be connected. I mean, I think some authors, especially when they're first getting in, will write their story and lay out their story and then go in and add in the combat. But I don't think, you don't need, you need to not think like that. You need to think of, this is the story, how the story is flowing, how is the combat flowing with that? And I would even almost take it so far as to say that the combat should be crescendoing at the same time as the story. So if storytelling has this, dramatic arc, combat should also kind of have this dramatic arc. It should start out easier and start to ramp up, and then you have a climax, and you have boss fights, and everything is all of the notes for both the story, and the combat, and even visuals if you can work that. The more those three work together, the better your mission will be.
Here's what Stoutes had to say on the subject. He said, "Combat balance is a nasty thing to do. What may be easy for you may be hard for others. Creating good combat is not just about throwing easy mobs around. It's more about dispersing mobs, making it possible to avoid them if necessary. If it is part of the story and therefore has to be done, don't use more than 2 or 3 mobs at most." I'd say, 2 or 3 mobs like at once on a player.
Well, I mean, he might well mean, there's been a couple of missions I played where you're killing like 6 or 7 waves of enemies, and it's
that can be a bit
annoying.
Getting to the point where you're grinding, I guess, in that point.
Yeah, but I kind of think, 3 is kind of the nice magic number. Past that, it starts to feel like a grind fest.
Another point that he says is, if you want to add a heavy mob, a captain level mob, make sure it's only 1 or 2 at most. And don't use mobs in every map.
And I would say, and this gets back right into my next point, which was, how do you balance difficulty? And I would say basically, captain fights for the most part will actually be fairly hard. Something you kind of got to keep in mind is, you touched on, not all players are the same difficulty. And even more so is players in this game have a tendency to spec heavier into space than they do into ground. So a lot of players will especially at max level, they'll do all space and be really good at space. And then,
because so many people just do infected space elite
Yeah.
over and over and over again and never do any ground.
Yeah, so I mean...
I've heard of a lot of players who choose alien characters simply because of the fact that they can give an alien character all space traits and no ground traits whatsoever.
But yeah, I mean, it often tends them to leave them a little vulnerable to ground, and then they wonder why everything on ground is so hard. But anyway, I mean, I think that when it comes to space versus ground, it's a little safer to beef up for space than it is for ground. Although you kind of got to watch what your character is fighting. I mean, for instance, Romulans can get very hard very quickly, especially if they start involving Theron devices.
Kill it whenever you see it.
Yeah, I mean,
The
Borg
Theron.
can be very, very difficult, especially if the player is caught unawares without their remodulator.
If you're doing a Borg mission, always put in a note that says, bring your remodulator.
Yeah.
They're easy to get, but easy to forget.
I know some authors like to use the Borg as a surprise, but Borg make terrible surprises.
Can't you replicate remodulator chips in combat now?
Yeah, but you need to give some advanced warning, even for that.
One thing I will say about combat balance is don't test it in the Foundry. Do a test publish and see how your Vice Admiral or whatever level character you want to take in, see how they do with it.
Yes, and difficulty will vary greatly for someone who's got all Omega gear versus someone who just got their character up to level 50 and hasn't started getting their cure even up to Mark 9.
On the subject of testing, ground combat is currently bugged in preview mode, so that more often than not, when you fight enemies, they'll end up disappearing and going to the other side of the map while you're in.
That doesn't happen as often anymore. That kind of
It still does happen, though. I think the point is that it's bugged. The only way to test it is in game, and it's actually
it's still better to do a test publish.
Yeah, the preview will never be the same as a live environment.
Even a better way to test it because you can try it with different character levels and see how they do.
Some of us don't have different character levels.
So
we have 11 characters at the level limit.
how do you guys either tone up a fight if you find a fight is too easy, or how do you make it easier?
I tend to add or subtract groups. You know, if I want a space battle to be hard, I'll put, you know, I'll put a battleship and some frigates. Cause that's manageable, but getting harder.
Right.
I don't want to overdo it, but that's how I tend to, or, you know, on the ground map, I'll, you know, I wanted Sink the Bismarck to be fairly difficult, so I put 2 captain mobs in the last map.
Yeah, kind of gotta be careful. I mean,
that's getting up there as far as difficulty goes, but
doubling up captain groups can get up. In fact, there's actually a warning in the descriptions for captain mobs. Is like,
is there?
You should not put more than one of these on, or make it extremely hard.
Well,
yeah, there is.
Fair warning. Anybody who plays that.
Do you guys ever try to divide groups up, like lock a couple of NPCs behind like a double invisible wall or something like that?
I did it once to make sure that I got one guy for you to fight. It's at a point in the story where you should have left your bridge officers behind, so it's just you. And I wanted it to be, you know, a one-on-one. And so far it's worked. The guys have not escaped from I just put a wall across the corridor and they don't seem to come through it.
It's a funny thing is I found as they put in more and more tech to try to prevent things like bridge officers getting stuck or NPCs getting stuck, that NPCs get very, very, very determined to rejoin their group. But I also, I mean, because NPCs don't spawn, if they're far enough away from the player, if part of a group fails to spawn, it can lead to some very strange behaviors from the remaining NPCs. So I don't recommend that either. In fact, the sweet spot, and the only way I've really found to make it work, is to have the parts you're fighting at one spot, and then not too far away, but out of sight, somewhere where the player can't get to, have the rest of them, and then do like a double invisible wall. And the double invisible wall kind of helps prevent them from popping through. Because one, they can kind of, if it's just one wall, they can actually pop through it, to try and rejoin their group to prevent, it's this anti-NPC sticking thing. But the double wall kind of prevents them, so even if they pop through the first one, the second one pushes them back. And for the moment that seems to be working, but you kind of got to plan that carefully. So another thing I wanted to touch on was, how do you choose, I mean, how it varies between choosing different races, how that alters combat.
Well, you kind of got to look at, you know, what the story needs, as far as the races we have to work with. You know, obviously if you're doing a mission where you're fighting Romulans, you're going to need to put Romulans down. But if you're creating your own race or reskinning somebody, then you got to look at what sort of powers they have, what sort of things they do that might be immersion breaking. Like, you know, if you're reskinning, Remans as some new alien race, you might get a mob that's going to do the thing where they spawn mirror versions of mirror images of themselves, and those are going to look like Remans.
Actually, it's funny. I've been running into this problem, and so far, the race that I've found, at least on ground, that is the least immersion breaking is actually the Nausicaans, because they don't really have any special attacks per se. They got some interesting weaponry, and they'll do a few attacks that are like holds and whatnot, but nothing that screams a specific race. In fact, it works really well for generic mobs. Unfortunately for me, I already used
your
them.
little Beanars are not picking up big slabs of concrete and throwing it at you.
Yeah. The only problem with that is that I already used that for part one, so I can't use it.
I think the key, part of the key is that different races using different kinds of attacks, people are geared for different things. Almost everybody's going to be ready for plasma because most people play STFs as well as other things. Or a lot of people do anyway. And so they're going to have plasma resistant things, whereas a lot of people tend to find difficulty in fighting the Hippiejohn in space per se, or even on the ground. Hippiejohn are pretty difficult for some folk. It's important to know what kind of energy type the opponent that you're using, that you're putting on the map, does to other people.
You know, it's funny. I started out, or I mean, originally when I made part 1, I started out using reskinned erosion in space, and there was a bug with the captain. So I ended up having to change that in order to fix the bug, or bypass the bug. And so I switched to a Breen. Well, I suddenly started getting reviews like, oh, this is so hard. And what I found out what was happening is the Breen liked to use tractor beams. And apparently all those escort-loving people were suddenly getting caught in these tractor beams. Their defense value dropped, and they got destroyed.
Because most people don't have anything in inertial dampeners. It's not a very common thing to put your points into, actually. Yeah. So, not for PvE content anyway. So
I snickered a little bit at that, and then left the Breen in.
Hey, nothing wrong with putting a little difficulty in your Foundry mission.
I mean, and I've gotten the gambit of the combat was great, the combat was too hard, the combat was too easy.
Sometimes you're not you get those right next to each other. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, you're not going to make everybody happy. So I wanted to finish off with the point of doing large-scale battles.
I like doing those, but you gotta make sure that you test it thoroughly because they'll go differently each time. You want to make sure that the side you want to win wins.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of got to watch weighting really closely. I haven't done any big-scale battles, but I've had a couple of battles that where you had a friendly NPC joining you, and you kind of got to be careful that the friendly NPCs are strong enough that they don't die easily.
For some reason, they seem to be weaker than the enemy mobs. I don't know if anybody else find that.
I found that captain mobs, once you strip away all of their support or the extra NPCs, are not nearly as strong as you think they are. At one point I was trying to do an ambush with, 4 specific characters. And so I just, took 4 separate, captain groups, stripped out all of their support NPCs, and then, had just the, 4 captains fighting you. I took them down easily. They're not as strong unless they kind of have the support of their team with them.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I would point out, and this is from Stoutes saying this. He says, "Don't forget respawn points."
Yes,
hugely.
A lot of authors forget that.
If there's a possibility your player might be killed, make sure you got respawn points.
And err on the side of caution on that one, because things that you wouldn't normally think would kill people will kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just if you're going to do like a boss fight or something fighting against a captain, respawn just before is a great thing.
Yep. So moving on, one of our other discussion topics this week is actually this is going to be purely speculative, but we know one of the things we're getting soon is a Dyson Sphere, which of course, if you're not familiar with it, from the episode Relics in TNG, the one with Scotty, it's basically a really giant sphere around a sun, so where the inside is actually habitable area. Like the surface of a planet, only, concave. So it's, on the inside of the sphere towards the star. This is actually one of my favorite episodes. And we're getting it. It's not the same sphere. So we never found out who built that one. We don't know who built this one. We don't know how it's going to work in game, how the maps are going to look, how how you're going to interact with this sphere. So here's my question is, given that we don't know anything, how would you like it to work with the Foundry? How would you like integration with the Foundry, with this Dyson Sphere?
Well, it's you mentioned it's kind of a hard thing not knowing how it's going to fit in. But in theory, I mean, it sounds like there's going to be a number of, you're going to fly around inside the sphere. And the inside of the sphere is a space zone. At various points along the surface of this sphere are places you can beam down to and fight battles or do things. And apparently there's even going to be a fleet holding inside this Dyson Sphere. So there'll be a spot somewhere on the surface of this Dyson Sphere that you can go in, beam down to this fleet holding. I imagine there might be some kind of a social zone you can beam down. But I mean, I could also see it that there are certain spots around the Dyson Sphere which are Foundry doors. And I mean, other than that, I mean, it might be kind of nice also just to have a space map that is the zone. Mm-hmm. So that if we, for instance, wanted to,
stage a huge fleet battle inside a Dyson Sphere.
Yeah, I mean, we could have that as an option. It would also be kind of nice, and this is something that I would love to see happen for every single social zone, is the ability to make the door to the social zone itself a Foundry door. How many times have Foundry authors diverted to some other place or gone to the console, an Earth Space Dock, because you can't just go to Earth Space Dock or even to, for instance, Utopia Planitia. The ideal place to go to Utopia Planitia would be at the door to the Sol system. And that goes true for Kronos and New Romulus.
Yeah.
I'd like to be able to use the door of this zone, so the door that you go to get into the Dyson Sphere as a Foundry door, and then we can send them to our own version of the Dyson Sphere if we want to do some cool epic space battle in there.
The thing that I would like to see is essentially the sort of concept art that they've shown us. It almost looks like sort of a grid system on the interior of this sphere, where you have sort of, a grid that has, within that grid it has, grasslands or buildings or whatever. I'd like to get one of those squares that's just blank. It's sort of concave, very subtly, and just blank. We can put anything we want on it.
That'd be kind of cool. I mean, or at least it had us all the backdrop of the Dyson Sphere, because we don't know what this thing is going to look like, but it is going to be trippy.
We also don't know the story of it. That's my issue with trying to figure out how I would use it, is we don't have any idea of what the story of this thing is. All we know is, you're going to be able to get a fleet holding there, supposedly, but we don't know how any of that's really going to work. So, unless we're saying, hey, create your own story about your own Dyson Sphere, which I think
probably what I do.
Yeah, which I think would be a cool approach. We just don't know how the story of this one's going to be. We don't have a clue.
Let's backtrack a little, and we know this Dyson Sphere is an adventure zone, and we've had several adventure zones up till now. So let's backtrack one level and look at Nimbus, and what kind of mission doors do we want on Nimbus?
I wonder if Nimbus could be a place where you could essentially make missions in the open game world.
They had enough interactable objects.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is, though, if we can kind of figure out how we would break or insert Foundry doors and items into Nimbus.
Well, there's plenty of spots in Paradise City where you could put some. You could put some doors out in the desert in a couple of different areas. There's some buildings out there, that sort of thing.
So yeah, I'm basically, my point is, going back to the Dyson Sphere, is that we can kind of follow the same thing. There will probably be some kind of social hub with all sorts of doors and whatnot. There's a whole lot of surface to this Dyson Sphere. This is literally the orbit of Earth spun around into a full sphere, and the entire inside of the orbit of Earth as a sphere is just land. We're talking incredibly vast amounts of space. No matter how much content Cryptic dumps into this, there's going to be vast amounts of space that are not touched. So
I wonder if you could almost make, like I was saying, give us each a grid to build in. You could almost make that persistent and allow other people to visit it and, make it almost like player housing.
Yeah. I don't
using
know about
Foundry tech to build on it.
Persistent. I don't know if, I don't even want to begin to hazard the kind of tech that would do something like this.
Or instance, but so people could easily access it.
But
rather than the traditional mission system.
That would require them to implement some sort of Foundry social zone. Which is something we've asked.
Yeah.
But it would take a lot of coding to do that.
Yeah, I don't know why.
We don't mind. They can do coding, right?
No, but
we can suggest whatever we want because they can do all the hard work.
But even sticking with the traditional system, there is going to be vast amounts of space where they can just stick tons and tons of different Foundry doors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a bunch of random ones scattered throughout the sphere.
Yeah.
We don't know how it's going to look in sector space either. So it's like you could have the main door for their adventure zone on one side and then a Foundry door on the other side of the sphere in sector space if it's that big. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about if it's going to show up in sector
We have
space.
no idea how that's going to work.
The funny thing about it is,
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
We know that this has something to do with the Iconian Gateway that they found under New Romulus. Spoilers.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's how you get to it. As an Iconian gateway.
So I'm wondering if this isn't. There's nothing to say that the Dyson Sphere is in known Federation space. So it may well be out there. We have no idea of the limits of distance the Iconia Gateway can travel.
One of the is concerning the Dyson Sphere is that since we know that we're going to be fighting the boss at the Dyson Sphere, that the Dyson Sphere itself is in the Delta Quadrant.
Could very well be.
Very possible. Since we know it isn't the one that the Enterprise encountered in TNG.
Right.
I know Dan's been throwing out a lot of speculative about how to integrate the Delta Quadrant into the Stowe story. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if they haven't already figured it out and they're just kind of gauging our reaction.
Honestly, the way that he's talked about things recently, going back as far as months before New Romulus, before they even started talking about Romulan, he started talking about how important getting first through 50th level Klingon content was for him. And I guarantee you, they already had the beginnings of New Romulus in mind. He was probably already working on those stories. They're smart enough these days to not talk about things until they're already more or less ready to go, with probably the ability to respond to what they hear the community saying about the plans that they're putting out there.
Yeah, I'm sure what's going on is they're sort of already working on stuff to tie in with Voyager and Delta Quadrant. And then he asked us what race you would like to encounter. And at that point, they're ready to respond to whatever that poll decides, if indeed they go with what the poll decides.
Yeah.
Which
they may
I couldn't be happier, because I think the Krenim would be awesome, and I think they're leading.
They are. Krenim are in the lead.
Yeah.
All right. So, really, there's not too much more to say until we know some more details, and that could be quite a while. Well, let's move on to Mark's topic for the night. I should say I had everybody submit their topics beforehand. We're trying a new thing there. His was, what are some of your painful memories of making your first mission? And conversely, what are some of the good memories you have from your first mission?
Well, in my mission, Bavat's Legacy, one thing I wanted to do was, the idea here is that you're preventing Bavat from taking over the Romulan Empire in the past with an army of augments. Part of the idea is that you storm his base where the army of augments is, and you then, have to fight the army of augments. Which meant that I stuck 25 Klingon groups on the map, and this was back when you actually had to make all enemy groups part of a kill objective, so you then had to kill all 25 Klingon groups before you could finish the map.
Ouch.
That proved to be an extremely time-consuming task, and as you guys mentioned earlier about how some people really just don't care for ground, some of the people who played the mission got raffle stomped by the Klingons.
Well, that's one of the things you deal with when you're the first-time author is that first time sort of seeing reviews of your work. And we've had people have very, very different reactions to reading these reviews that we've seen, and I'm sure we've all been through that. I mean, you have these missions where people tell you, you suck, you're terrible, don't ever make a mission again. Let's see, painful memories from my first mission. I guess probably because I wrote my first mission not knowing what the limitations of the Foundry were going to be. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it painful, but it was definitely a difficult experience. Because I was writing the Foundry was on Redshirt when I first found out about it, and I didn't know what it was going to be like, so I was writing kind of in the dark, and I just had to guess as to what I could do, what I couldn't do. I had to guess at, what sort of plots would be possible, and all that sort of thing. It turned out alright in the end, but it was definitely not an easy process. Good memories from my first mission would probably be when I ran it, or I had a guy named Phil Bones run it. He was around in the beginning of the Foundry, and one of the first people to do that sort of in-depth text review for people. And he just, he had a lot of great suggestions for my mission, and it just made it fantastic, I think. Fantastic contribution. And obviously there's many different people who are around doing that today, and couldn't be happier that there are. Because that is invaluable for authors.
Mm-hmm.
Greendragoon, of course, only has one mission published. So what are your painful and good memories from making that one?
As painful count as not thinking about the fact that it took you 8 months to make part 1 and then ending part 1 in a cliffhanger, and taking into consideration that it would be many months before you had part 2 done. Does that count as painful?
It was painful for the rest of us.
Well,
I think it counts.
I think right leading up to publishing it, I did a lot of worrying about that I was bogging things down, because I had you, especially on that Persephone map, I had you doing a lot of stuff, and it just kept getting longer and longer as I realized more things that you needed to do in order to make the plot work, or that not leave these gaping holes. And so it ended up being a really long map, and I was fretting a lot about that map just dragging. I was afraid it was going to drag, and people were going to hate it, and thankfully people didn't hate it. There were a couple of 1-stars early on, as there always are, but when you're a new author and you don't have a lot of reviews, it can be a very confusing experience. I think it helped a little that everyone else was complaining about 1-stars right at the exact same time. So I kind of was given some notion that, these happen no matter how good your mission is. Obviously, I think my high point was right around Christmas when then this was several months after it had been published. I was off for Christmas like everybody else, and as every Foundry author, I checked my Foundry mission daily to see if the play count had gone up. And up until that point, I had managed to pull in about maybe 200 plays in a few months. And for some reason, during that Christmas break, the plays just suddenly skyrocketed. Like, for some reason, I had been hovering maybe 2/3 of the way down the top rated list. So I had a lot of really good missions around me, but it wasn't the most notable thing. And then for some reason, I guess everyone was waiting until the Christmas break to play my mission. It might have helped a little that Foundry Files did their top. They had done a review back around Thanksgiving, I think, and it was like the same week that the Foundry broke for season 7, making my mission unplayable. And so I figured that I pretty much had killed any goodwill I'd gotten off of them. And then they did a top 10 list a couple weeks later for for New Year's. And since my mission is rated pretty highly with them, I think I might have gotten some press off of that. But yeah, after that point, my mission really skyrocketed, and for the next couple months, I really watched it climb in the ratings. So that was definitely the high point.
Well, let's see, we got one here from Stoutes. He says, I don't really have any painful memories. One of my better memories was the sudden realization that ground missions were much more to my liking than space designs, which he never thought he would like. Which is sort of the inverse of you, Hippie, because I know that you were big on ground missions, hated designing space maps, and then suddenly decided that you actually kind of liked doing it. Is that right?
Now I like doing both, but I definitely have a preference for working on the ground maps.
Yeah, I do too.
Without doubt. Yeah, I like the ground maps better.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, it's just that I like designing ground maps more than I like designing space maps. It's not that space maps aren't fun in their own way, but...
Hippie, your first mission was it was a contest entry, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. I've got it hiding in my, unpublished state right now.
Not a one of Brandflake's, but one of Primetime UGC's, right?
Yeah, it was Kirkfat's mission it was a contest he sponsored for do a mission based on the original series, in some way, either in spirit, make it a sequel to an original series episode, whatever it is. It was pretty wide open, and being an original series fan, I said, hey, I'm gonna figure out how to use the tool. I don't really have any bad memories whatsoever, except for, the stress of scrambling to try to figure out how to use the tool because I had a story I wanted to tell. That really would be about the extent of a bad memory, if there even could be, described as one. It's just that it was just a matter of that I didn't know how to use the tool yet, and I wanted to make a mission. So, and it was kind of on a deadline. I had to do it by whatever time, the entry was, and I think that was like 2 days from the time that I saw the contest. So I had to figure out that would be my worst experience of my first mission, would be that I had to figure out how to do it in 2 days. That was kind of a pain. But good memory was just, hey, I got to, honestly, the best part of it is I got to meet, kind of the Foundry community through it all, and working with, people and finding out how to do things that I didn't know how to do before, because I had made this, tons of new connections by simply making a mission and figuring out where chat rooms and people talked about these things were. So I think more valuable than anything, what I take away from it, that was the best part of it, was that it led me to a bunch of people that could help answer questions when I had them. So really, that's what I would have to say about, best and worst parts of it.
Moving on, we got a topic here from Stoutes. He says, Easter eggs. Everyone who has ever programmed a bit has done one of these. Have you ever put a funny NPC in a corner on a space map, or, a board doing funny animations or anything like that? What sort of fun Easter eggs have you put in your missions that only you know about?
I never did any. Oh, go ahead.
I put a bunch in my Spotlight mission. I kind of knew that I didn't, when I did Spectres episode 6, that was almost immediately after I had entered into Kirkfat's contest. I still didn't know anything about using the tool. I couldn't even imagine using triggers at that point, really. And so I thought one way I could make it stand out would be to put little gimmies in there, where, for example, you run around you're part of the fighting, and the mission takes place on the corridors of the original series, the original series Constitution map. And in the captain's quarters on that map, there's a picture on the wall of a baseball player with the number 8, and there's a little wooden model of a like a Wright Brothers style biplane. And so what I did is I put I used invisible objects so that they didn't sparkle necessarily, but if you walked past them close enough, it would say interact, and you could interact with it. And so for the one on the number 8, since it was a mission about time travel, I put the quote from Babe Ruth about deja vu there. So that if you wandered by and you happened, there's no reason in the mission to go into the captain's quarters. But if you did and you walked up there, you got a Babe Ruth quote about deja vu. And if you walked past the wooden biplane, you got a Wright Brothers quote about never letting it be over until it's over, and things like that. And I put something like that on every single map of Spectres episode 6. I think those count as Easter eggs.
Well, for me, I have a habit of telling people what the Easter eggs are on the forum, so that they're not really something only I know about.
They've been spoiled.
Yeah.
See, I've had a lot of people find them, and I like the fact that they're there has made people go back and play the mission again. It has replay value.
Had a lot of people tell me that they didn't really notice several of them, because a lot of them are things that you just kind of, it's like what you said, that you don't really think to do this, because one of them is something that's only accessible after you've completed the map and gotten the trigger to beam up. That one I don't think anyone ever found on their own, simply because you talk to the NPC to finish the map, then you have to talk to him again in order to do the Easter egg thing.
I've got a couple of Easter eggs in my missions. Well, more than a couple, because I love doing it. One of them is, like, in my Spotlight mission over on the KDF side, there's one that's a bar scene. And so you go into this bar, there's 2 or 3 Easter eggs in here. One of them is, you see this Trill civilian talking to a Cardassian. The Trill civilian is actually the Starfleet Admiral who had to resign in my first series of missions. I kind of put him anywhere there's a bunch of civilians. I kind of just put him like he's wandering the galaxy, since he doesn't have anything to do now. He had to resign. Another one is there's a band playing in a corner. I very much tried not to make the band look like anybody famous, because of course that would be bad. That would be against the EULA. However, if you go up close to them, you can hit a button and listen to the song that they're playing. And the song is by a favorite band of mine from the Faroe Islands called, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but they're called Toyr. It's spelled Tyr. And this song that I put in there is entirely in Faroese, so unless you happen to speak that, you're not going to know what it's saying. I don't even know what it's saying, because I don't speak Faroese. I just like the song. And then the other one is there's 3 guys in the corner. One of them named Captain Slow, one of them named Hamster, and the other one named Jezza, who, of course, are the 3 hosts from Top Gear, their nicknames. And they're arguing about a race that they're doing across the universe. And they're arguing about what ships they picked. Because, of course, anybody who can see any of my avatars knows that I'm a huge Top Gear fan. So, another one that I was telling you guys about earlier is, I don't lampshade it very much, I don't hang my hat on it, but at the end of the Mirror Universe mission that I made, the big climactic battle takes place over Ceti Alpha 5, which most Star Trek fans would recognize as the planet that Kirk marooned Khan on. So obviously this is the Mirror Universe version, so I put in my little history that I typed up and put in the databanks is that in the Mirror Universe, Kirk simply executed Khan like the moment he found him. Because that's what Mirror Kirk would do. So they were never marooned on there, so they never had the whole thing with the Genesis experiment in the Mirror Universe. So none of that actually happened in the Mirror Universe. So it's just an empty planet. Of course, had been lush until its sister planet exploded and knocked it out of its orbit and caused it, big tidal stresses and caused it to die, essentially. So all you have is a big brown planet floating there. It doesn't have the history that in the Mirror Universe that it does in our universe. So I don't know. Greendragoon, do you have much in the way of Easter eggs?
Not really, just because it was my first mission and I was just trying to get the story conveyed. Although, I think I mentioned this before on the show, if you go and read the backstories, there is a hidden implied meaning between these 2 captains. That you kind of got to fill in some lines to get at, and it's actually something that'll kind of come up later in the part 2. I think you said you were going to go and try and find it at one point.
Did I?
Yeah. That was a while ago.
I'd have to go back and replay it, but I don't want to get another character stranded in the Delta Quadrant.
Well, in that case, I will. Let me see if I can find it here. I think if you read the captain of the Persephone, Elaine Lai. At some point early in her career, she ends up getting transferred to the USS Agamemnon under Captain Kevin Nall, which you'll know is the other ship that gets lost. And you'll notice that she later, in her log, it says she transferred for personal reasons. And that is kind of a hint at what... There was a reason she transferred off the Agamemnon. So
the other Easter egg that I like to do is in every mission that I make, I like to have somebody who may or may not be a Section 31 agent, but who is not revealing themselves, and I will not break their cover. So good luck guessing who it is.
This is in every mission?
Yeah, every mission.
Is it the same character?
No.
Oh.
That would be a bit too obvious, wouldn't it? So,
might be.
Yeah, that's the other one that I kind of like to have a little fun with. Because I figure,
Unless it's like this bartender that keeps showing up.
All right, our final topic for the night is one that came out of a big forum discussion, one that Hippie wanted us to discuss on the show. Mm-hmm. I had been one of the things that lots of stuff about the new Star Trek movies, the JJ Trek as people call them. Lots of threads on that crop up in the 10 Forward forum from time to time, and this particular one was, what would you like to see as the villain for the next movie? And I chimed in and I said, I would like there not to be a villain, not a personified villain anyway, not a big bad as they say these days. And a lot of people didn't really like that. They said, how can you have a Star Trek story without a big bad? It's like the Avengers just going around taking down muggers. And so, here's the, and I don't agree with that. I think it is entirely possible to have an exciting movie, and in our case, an exciting Foundry mission, without having a personified villain. So let's talk about that. How do we do that? How do we go about doing that?
Well, first question is, does Star Trek the Motion Picture count?
Does it count as exciting?
As a personified villain?
I say no, because I was not excited by the motion picture. Not even a little
I like
bit.
Parts of it, but...
Yeah, parts of it, but it didn't keep me entertained for the whole thing.
Ooh, okay, as a better one is The Voyage Home, because in the motion picture and The Voyage Home, the conflict arises from attempting to deal with some sort of gigantic space
thing that we don't understand.
That's a really good point, because it's really hard to call the probe the big bad. Or even personified in that matter, especially since
it's sort of acting villainously from our perspective, but maybe not.
And we certainly don't win by defeating it.
Right.
Doing it for bad reasons. Well, in the Doomsday device, you end up with a death match against this thing that, at first glance, appears to be indestructible, and then you eventually come up with some way to damage the thing, which may or may not have actually destroyed the thing completely, depending on which follow-up novel you read. Anyways, but they actually did that in a few other episodes too, is that there would be some sort of giant space creature that you could think of it as a villain from a human point of view, but from the creature's point of view, it's just, doing its own thing. And we're in the way.
Star Trek has tons of episodes that are where there is no villain. I recently watched Remember Me, a TNG episode, and it's Beverly stuck in this situation, but there's no bad guy.
It's the situation.
Yeah. Was created indirectly by her son.
Yeah, but okay.
We all know Wesley is the real villain of Star Trek: The Next Generation. So yeah, I'd say what the thing we're talking about here is sort of, there's two things. You have, I remember this from my creative writing classes where you have different kinds of conflict. One is man versus man. The one that we were talking about a second ago with Remember Me is man versus nature. Man versus the things around him, his environment around him. And then the one we were talking about earlier with Doomsday Device and that kind of ilk is a third one that I would call man versus thing. Man versus some sort of phenomenon that is acting with intelligence, but he doesn't understand what it wants.
Well, there's all sorts of conflict. There's man versus society. There's man versus himself.
Yeah. All of which done on Star Trek many, many times.
Yeah, so it's almost a kind of a disservice of Hollywood that they can only think to one kind of conflict.
I would kind of cite an example from my absolute favorite film of all time, which is The Shawshank Redemption, which, you might say that, the prison warden is the villain in that, but I don't think he is. I think the villain is the prison itself and what it does to you when you're in it. And so, that's sort of man versus situation versus his environment. And I think that can make for an absolutely great film.
I think it can too. I think part of the issue that we run into is that modern storytelling, that things like the Avengers, like you were saying, they have modern audiences trained to think a certain way.
Yeah, how many times you in the run up to a movie do people discuss, who's going to be the villain?
Yes, exactly.
We're trained to expect that.
What was that was the only thing people cared about with, what was Benedict, who was the villain he was going to play?
Who is John Harrison?
Yeah, who is this guy? So
yeah, but I mean, it's fertile ground for an upset.
But I think it really comes down to with how modern audiences are programmed. Like, when they made Star Trek the Motion Picture, or when they made The Voyage Home would flop these days completely. I really believe that, because it's a different kind of motion picture than people of modern audiences are used to seeing.
It's a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great movie.
And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful ending to the trilogy
the trilogy.
Star Trek Con. Just because,
yeah. But my response in this thread was basically, agreeing with something that I'd heard that Carl Urban had said, which was, this third movie ought to be about something to do with exploration. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you can get into some great situations out on the fringe of known space without having any kind of a personified villain, and have it be a very exciting movie.
I would agree.
You just got, it's all in how you present it. Don't see the third movie being without a villain, just because, like Hippie said, we're kind of a different audience these days.
You know what we need to do? Leonard Nimoy needs to direct Star Trek 3. That'll solve everything. Quick, we can get him while he's still around.
Pun intended. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on how to make a Foundry mission without a villain.
I think it'd be kind of cool to do like an escape this scenario sort of a mission where you're like, your ship is trapped somewhere and you have to figure out a way out.
I think there's certainly the chance to do man versus nature too, or, the crew versus nature kind of story, and making stellar phenomenon be the thing that is causing the problem, not necessarily an enemy that you have to kill. Or even planetary geographical phenomenon.
Well, that's been done many times in Star Trek, and with varying degrees of success, but I figure at least some of the episodes were good.
Oh yeah. I can think of a few.
And I can think of ways to do it in the Foundry, as we've been talking about. If you had to evacuate a planet, there certainly could be, if you put something on a time frame that, the sun is going to go supernova and you have to evacuate the planet quickly or something, to that effect. There are a lot of ways you could create a story that doesn't have a personified villain or big bad. It's all storytelling. It certainly means your mission's probably going to have no kill objectives. That would be my,
But it doesn't necessarily mean no combat.
It does, yeah, just because it doesn't mean no combat to say no,
villain.
To say no villain.
It would be cool to have like a mission where your ultimate goal is to try and escape this maze, or like you're trapped in these ruins or something like that and you have to get out. But as you try to figure your way out, you come across like different little elements of a story that's evolving.
I played a mission like that actually. It was Stiletto by Wogged, who unfortunately doesn't seem to be making missions anymore. Essentially you were trapped in your own mind and trying to find a way out. It was a very, very well done mission.
Right on.
Well, we're running into our time limit for the first time in a few weeks, so we will say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.